everyone, welcome to You Got This Cyberspace 2022. I hope you're all having a wonderful time at the conference and workshop so far. And if you're joining us for the first time, You Got This is a community event series focused on discussing core skills needed for a happy, healthy work life. In this session, as Nathaniel mentioned, I'll be talking about building team trust virtually, some strategies and tactics that my team has used, and why I think this is so important. Before we jump into all that, I think we covered a little bit of this in the intro, but a little bit about me. My name is Carol Huang. I'm a developer community program manager at Stripe, and I grew up in Los Angeles, although I live in New York City now, where it is a lovely below freezing winter morning. My Twitter and email are up there, so feel free to connect with me there. But during the talk, I think Discord is where you can put comments and questions. I encourage you along the way to drop in ways that your team has handled these challenges, and we'll cover any questions at the end. For now, I'd love to hear on the Discord where you're all tuning in from. A little bit about my work background, I've been working in developer marketing or community for a while. The exact term that you hear for this can vary. The main point of all this is that I think about community a lot. Communities of users, communities of contributors to open source projects, communities of teammates inside a company. And while all of these companies were, cross-continental, cross-country, global in some way, at the time I worked there, none of them had as much span as Stripe currently does. And a little bit about Stripe, if you're not familiar with us, we're a global technology company. We're dual headquartered in San Francisco and Dublin, Ireland, with offices all around the world, including what we call a remote hub, which actually a number of my coworkers belong to. Our goal is to build the economic infrastructure of the internet with the ultimate goal of increasing the gross domestic product of the internet. And what that kind of means is only 3% of GDP happens online today. We want to increase this by helping more companies get started selling, get into new markets, and launch new business models. So enough about that. In this talk, we're going to cover a couple of things. You already know who I am, so I'm going to go over a little bit what my team looks like. I'm going to cover the common challenges that we face and why these are important to address for building trust, and that get into the specific strategies and tactics that we've tried, including what they look like in practice and some tips for implementing them. So my team is actually the developer advocacy team at Stripe. We are made up of 10 people spread out across 7 time zones. Of these 10 people, more than half of them, most of them, are actually in that remote hub I mentioned earlier, which means they're in a location where we don't actually have a physical office anyway. So we're like an extra virtual team. From the very beginning of this team, which was created about like a year and a half to 2 years ago, we were already very cross-functional and don't all remotely do the same thing. And when I started working with this team, and actually when I started working at Stripe, I had never actually met anyone from Stripe, much less anyone from my team. And I never met any of them until just a couple of them in the US. We managed to meet up more than a year later. So obviously, this leads to quite a few challenges, not just because we were so spread out, but because we were also all spinning up from a work from home stage. A lot of stuff was going on. I think we are all very aware that a lot of things have impacted our lives in these past 2 years, but some of these might be very common to you. So for example, like I mentioned, I never met any of them. I've worked remotely before, but never actually without some base level of meeting some of my teammates. And I know this is something that a lot of you do already, but they are all kind of these two-dimensional images in my head. And I mean that both literally and a little bit figuratively. They were flat people of whom I only saw one facet, and that was just professional employee facet, And while remote doesn't always mean spread out, it very much does in our case. So with time zones, even if we're all awake at the same time, it might not all be working hours for us. And even within the US, the rhythms of work are different. When I'm trying to eat lunch in New York City, everybody on the West Coast 3 hours behind is logging on and starting to respond to messages. So it can be a little bit difficult. Related to this, of course, is finding the balance between sync and async work modes. And all that that means is that, are you talking with somebody in a real time, back and forth, where you're able to respond and get kind of more iterative, like clarification on what's going on? Or are you having an exchange where each person responds as they're able to? And a factor to take into consideration that I don't want to underestimate is these cultural differences in communication. And I don't literally just mean between 2 countries or 2 continents, even within a country, north, south, east, west coast, middle, there are significant differences in how you might be communicating. And so obviously this all makes it really hard to do some basic work things like move projects to the next steps, get consensus, brainstorm. But it also makes it hard for us to do things like feel connected with each other, share kind of emotional states on project, and build empathy for each other. And because this is the You Got This conference about these core skills for a happy, healthy work life, we're going to focus on these bottom three. These are less about explicit project management and work, but more about the fact that we're all different human beings working with other different human beings, trying to make it through this world. Mainly because I think these three, this communication, this connection, this empathy, are three pretty vital components of trust. And there are some pretty good arguments for why you should care about each of these if you're not convinced already. Without connection, you're basically going to be pretty lonely. Research of the past year, if there's anything that's confirmed, is that loneliness is bad for you. It's bad for your mental health, it's bad for your physical health. And for me, like, I just want to feel some modicum of connection with people that I mentally spend probably 40 plus hours a week with. That's already enough for me. But maybe for you, you're like, I'm not here to make friends. That's fine. There's other reasons to care too. You know, Without kind of getting these insights into emotional states, you're blind to a lot of things. You're operating blind and you don't know when you could be helping, regardless of whether you're a manager, a leader, or a teammate. You don't know about issues and friction that might be going on with another team and you might wade into something. And like, if you want to think about it very selfishly, like, you don't know what the systemic issues are. So in a way, like, you might run your head into them over and over and over because you don't know what's going on. And in a less cynical, selfish way, if you're trying to be an optimistic agent of change, you also can't identify what needs changing within your company. Empathy, I think, is a pretty kind of important one. Without empathy, you're going to get less help, you're going to give less help. People are probably going to undervalue your work. And at least for me, peer reviews are a large part of many companies, and they honestly usually have an impact on your bank account if you really want to get down to the bottom line. You want your work to be valued, and you want people to understand that what you're doing is important. So, could you get your work done without feeling connected and all of that good stuff? Honestly, yeah, you probably could. But I bet it'd be a pretty crummy working experience where you think everybody thinks you're incompetent or you think everybody else is incompetent. And I'm willing to bet that most of you want more than that because we interact in a society. Humans are social creatures. We want to be connected. We want to know where we can help and we want our work to be valued. And my bottom line here is that a team without trust is not a team. You're just a bunch of people with the same HR paperwork. So, what's key for moving from paperwork to team? We've kind of made these 3 points: connection, open communication, empathy, and we'll go over each of these with specific goals now that we know how important they are. So, first of all, building connectedness. It took a good couple of months after the creation of our team before we made this. We made a private team channel. Before this, we were making do with a public channel in Slack where random people would kind of offer their unsolicited opinions. A lot of stuff was happening in back channel DMs. We just clearly weren't all on the same page, which of course is especially hard to do when you're all in different time zones. And I have to say that making this private channel has been a game changer. It has helped a ton in terms of creating a safe space for us to talk. And I want to say the caveat that like nothing's ever going to be the same as being able to say something in person without Big Brother listening, but this gave us a place to really process information together, ask the questions among the actual relevant crowd, and also vent when we really needed to. Venting is something that can be helpful emotionally and also useful for kind of really figuring out what your blockers are. So it's important to have a safe space for that. Some things that you might want to think about before you start one is, first of all, like, are you going to include only people who are literally on your team, or are you going to include people who are your embedded partners that you basically work with daily as if they were on their team? There's no right answer for this. The way I'd personally answer it is, would it be helpful for you all to have a private space to talk? And this is a little bit self-serving because I was an embedded partner before I actually joined this team formally. And if I didn't have this private channel with them, I wouldn't have had anywhere to talk about the things that were impacting us all in the same way and to talk through and process those. Another thing to think about before you implement this is kind of managerial levels. I would say that you probably want to include the person who's the manager of your team, but what about skip levels, like the person that manages them, or people who are your manager's counterpart on another close team? The answer to this one is honestly going to differ a lot based on how hierarchical your company is. Use your best judgment in terms of the HR culture at your company, but also based on the kinds of relationships that you have. And the sort of third thing to Important thing to think about when creating a safe space for connectedness is your retention policy and whether or not you even have a retention policy. What this means is that in Slack or sort of whatever communication tool you're using, how often things get erased and if they even get erased. So if you work at a larger company, you likely already have a company-wide retention policy set by IT or security. But think about how often it all might disappear and what impact that might have on what people say and how useful it'll be in terms of sharing information. For us, things disappear fairly quickly. I think it's something like a month to 2 months. So I try to use email for things that are important to file away, and our Slack channel more for like, hey, this is something cool, or can we talk about this in the next 48 hours, or like, I just need to vent right now. Um, the culture of how your company uses tools like this is going to differ. So this is probably the point on which we'll need to think most about how your team fits within the context of your company. And just be aware when you use it because it is still a space on company resources. So speaking of that, company resources, like how do we team build? One of the other things we do is have a monthly social coffee chat. If you're familiar with working remote, this is a very common thing in order to stay connected as people. Tends to be near the end of the week. And of course, depending on your time zones, it could be a coffee chat, an afternoon tea break, a happy hour. We just have a few rules so it doesn't become a work meeting. The first one is just no tactical talk. You can talk about high level things like if you're dreaming, brainstorming, blue sky dreaming, but not like, hey, did you see John's response? Can you reply to him? Don't do that. We kind of use this as a space to talk about everything from what you're doing this weekend to what kind of keyboards we all have, like how we're using certain stipends or how we're dealing with things like performance reviews. And I would say, like, use this as a space to share as much about your personal life as you're comfortable with and as you want to. It's kind of like what you would talk about in the office on a Friday before you go out of town for a long weekend. I would say that the last 2 years in particular have taught us that the global environment of what's going on in our lives really cannot be divorced from work. And it's always helpful just to see your coworkers as human beings with a full life and for them to see you that way too. I'd say this is a synchronous one. So right now we have a monthly APAC Asia time zone friendly one and a monthly EMEA friendly one, and people just join whichever one fits their schedules. Um, Speaking of asynchronous, we also use an app called Marco Polo. I have heard this described as Snapchat for millennials, if that helps. It's kind of like Instagram stories. It basically lets you share short video or picture plus audio clips with each other. And this is kind of a lightweight, optional way to share parts of our days or weekends with each other, with people in Ireland, the Netherlands, Japan, as well as 7 states across the US. I get to see things like vistas of the Irish countryside and moose in Montana and like vineyards in California. I think this is a pretty sweet deal. But this is also, and this is key, a non work channel. This is not a part of your official work computer. And I don't mean this just for like the liability reasons, but also just for the mental divide and difference that that brings to you. Speaking of doing things together, I hope it's a given that you're all doing remote team building events. I truly do hope that your company understands why these are key. And what I would actually really encourage with these is to include the people on other teams that you work with closely. A lot of this talk has been focused on your direct teammates, but these coworkers have less of a reason to know what you're doing day to day. And if you're familiar with organizational behavior theory, these bonds form these kinds of activities and interactions are called weak ties. And these are just as important, or more important actually, than the strong ties of who you work with out of daily necessity. They lead to things like better innovation, better problem solving, doing great things as a cross functional team. But for me, these are also important because they help you feel more connected. Because one of the basic building blocks of feeling connected with others is having the same experiences. It's basically going through roughly the same emotions at the same time. So, just overall, some tips for implementing these, be the community you want to see. Our group chat in particular, like I think because of the makeup of our team, it's a very affirming one. We're just people who like to recognize what everybody has contributed, even if it sometimes means like shouting out what every single person has shared. And it's important to be aware that we all have different levels of interaction as we have different levels of like time and emotional resources. And that's key that this is okay, that this is all optional because nobody wants to be forced to team build. That's a great episode of The Office, but a terrible experience to actually go through. And in particular, if you're a manager, You don't want to become the central node of this. What you want is to become part of a web. Basically, you want to build a community, whether that's a private channel or a video group that people want to be a part of, and model that behavior yourself. And of course, when we talk about modeling behavior, culture is a set of norms that has its own inertia. But as new people come in, that culture will shift a little bit as they bring in their own ideas. They'll hew a little bit to what they see going on. And I even see this with teammates who've just joined in our past 2 months. But they'll also shift things up a little bit. And in a delightful turn of events for me, our Marco Polo has become very pet focused. you know, I've gotten to see my coworker's puppy grow up in the past year. I've gotten to catch up on my other coworker's cat that when they got her, I think her daughter tried to carry her into a Zoom early on. These are all things that humanize us for each other and personally help me feel more connected, which is key to building trust down the road. I love that somebody, I think Akash, you've just mentioned, we have a virtual fika, which is a Swedish tradition of having coffee, snacks, and just chill for a bit every Monday. Doing it at the beginning of the week is also a great way to start things off. I like that idea. I might steal that. Sharing, so number 2, sharing emotional state. What does this actually mean? Basically, this just means share how the project is going, not just what's getting done. If you don't like thinking about this in terms of emotion or that doesn't resonate as much with you, you can try thinking about it as an assessment on the energy of a project or their work. Where is energy being directed? Where is energy being sapped? Obviously, this has clear benefits for people like me who are program managers to help identify where processes are breaking down. But for managers trying to support their direct reports, this can also be a more accessible and comfortable way for some people to express that they need help without feeling like they're complaining. And this is something I want to stop and take a moment to point out. It's very common for people to have trouble asking for help either from their manager or coworker when they don't trust them. Especially in our field where imposter syndrome runs rampant, it can be really hard to personally recognize that something you're stuck on isn't something you should know already or will get you called out as an imposter for asking for help with. That's why I particularly think it's important that if you're more senior, whether you're a manager or not, it's very key to kind of model this vulnerability because the more of these emotional states that you're personally able to share, the more your teammates will trust you in turn to share, which hopefully means you'll be able to communicate more clearly and identify what the real issues are to make your work life better. Now, we touched upon different communication norms a little bit in the beginning, and this could be a whole talk on its own. I'm pretty sure it is. But people can have very different ways of communicating around the world, around the United States. As an example, as I mentioned, while I'm from Los Angeles, I've lived in New York City my entire working life. And the norms and stereotypes of communication for the Northeast Coast are very direct, they're very clear, they're straight to the point. However, another way I might describe this is very rude, too blunt, without any social niceties. There's a lot of different ways that this can come across. So, how do you convey emotional states accurately when somebody might not even recognize it's what you're trying to do? So, kind of the difficult answer here is give them the benefit of the doubt. Be curious, not judgmental. Hopefully, bank on the currency of trust that you already have. Hopefully, you've already built up some feelings of connectedness so you don't automatically assume that they're an idiot. Maybe you've learned a little bit more about how they speak and how they communicate through your other avenues of building connectedness. But another shorter answer is read this book. This is a book, The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. I know a lot of people who have read this as a company, particularly like younger tech startups that are very spread out. We're actually currently reading this as a team with an asynchronous book club set up through Notion. There's another example there for you of building connectedness. And it really just helps you have a possible framework to start understanding things. It doesn't have the answers for everything. It's not going to give you a direct translation, but at least it gives you some different ways to think about why somebody might be coming across a certain way to you when it seems like that's clearly not what they're intending. So I want to clarify, these are all a work in progress for all of us. I'd love to hear in the Discord how you communicate energy and emotion to your teammates. I see some people talking about sort of group conversation dynamics. We can definitely talk about that a little bit more later. Essentially, what I want to emphasize here is like we all have a wide range of communication tools, ranging from emoji reactions to emojis to text to audio to video. Use all of them appropriately when they'll add the most color. You know, What I like to do when we're having our async stand-ups is add in a little bit of color commentary. Like, I'm particularly notorious for adding emojis, whether they're around impatience or excitement or anything else. Other bits of commentary that I particularly like from my coworkers is kind of laying out what's blocking or frustrating them, what they hope to do that day, in addition to kind of what they plan to do that day, and also like a mini assessment of what keeps getting kicked down the line and maybe a thought about why that is. And usually for me, reading through these, I can get enough of a sense of where my teammates' energy is going throughout the course of a week. And also insight into other things happening, like whether they're moving to a new house or a new city or even a new country. Basically don't constrain everything to one tool. Speaking of energy, if you're just trying to get a sense of how everybody feels about something, definitely just try a quick emoji poll to get a pulse. That's a lot easier to ask somebody to click a button than to ask them, hey, what do you think? And make them all type out a broad spectrum of emotions and opinions out. Make it easy for them. It's just, especially if you're not sure whether everybody is on board before you're moving forward on something, because this can give you a little bit of a sense of like where your team might be unhappy or happy. And I kind of touched upon this earlier, but like, use all your tools. Stripe is a very video heavy company, so most people are at least used to being on camera. I still personally have video meetings, either sync or async, with almost everybody on my team, either once a week or twice a month, depending on how often we work together. And what we try to do is when we're having meetings, whether that's async or sync, video or audio, we try to kind of have multiple channels of communication going. So with synchronous Zoom meetings, what that means is we have the side Zoom chat or a side Slack chat going as people kind of make comments on things, make jokes, react. That gives you additional shadings of how people are feeling about something without them feeling like they're disrupting the flow of everything. Because as I'm sure we're all aware at this point, it can be really awkward when you feel like you want to give a reaction, but it's going to stop what they're saying. And there's always that like minute delay that makes it weird enough. With asynchronous ones, I usually accompany a video or an audio clip with some descriptive text and emojis as well, particularly because most of the reason I'm having async meetings is because they're halfway around the world. So we don't get a chance to have face-to-face real time, and it's even more important that I'm understood the first time around because we really only have so many back and forths per week based on time zones. Video or audio can really help share nuance that might be missed otherwise. And having a text accompaniment can be easier for people who don't speak English as a first language or are hard of hearing or just for any number of reasons. Basically, don't constrain everything to just one tool, whether that's text or video. Use everything in your tool belt when it's appropriate, and particularly when you're trying to convey anything around emotion or energy, because those are things that can be easily misread. So just some tips when you're trying to do things like this. Keep it about processes, not people. Venting can be helpful as an emotional release and validation, as long as you don't do it too extensively. Basically, try not to fall into the danger mode where you negatively bond with somebody because you're just complaining about a third person. So just keep it productive. And sort of the last note on this is we are at a bajillionth wall at this point in the pandemic. It is okay to be human. Sometimes your energy state or how a project is going is basically that you are dealing with a sick child or an overflowing toilet or a sick child and an overflowing toilet, and you don't get to something just because you don't get to something. And that's just part of how the project is going. And you don't need to judge yourself for that. You don't need to judge anybody else for that. Sharing doesn't happen without emotional trust. So a third point here is building empathy for each other's pain points. Empathy here is very, very important. And you kind of heard me touch upon this multiple times, but to give empathy, to get empathy, give empathy. You have to model behavior you want to see, apply the golden rule, trust to be trusted. However you want to put it, this is a two-way street, and people behave how they're treated. Another thing is make realistic deadlines about yourself so you can keep them, and be honest about your capacity. Because for somebody else looking at you without knowing what's going on inside your head, it's very easy to mistake carelessness for malice or ill will when you don't know them, which is why that earlier team building of connectedness and emotional state is important. And I mentioned consistency here because it's a lot easier for a teammate to have empathy when they can see you being consistent, but factors outside of your control shifting and throwing things off schedule. Basically, make it easy for somebody to have empathy for your situation and give you the benefit of the doubt. Oops. And this third one, I think it's very important to be honest and clear. I believe in this honesty being the best option, not the least just because it's the easiest, but be honest about what you're good at and what you like doing and how you can help. Essentially, if you think about it, what can you offer in the storefront of yourself if you're selling your skills? Being able to identify these things is something that you can and should develop. If you're interested in figuring out some ways to identify what it is that you feel like you're good at, let me know in the Discord. We can cover it during the Q&A. But the most important thing here is to share honestly and listen when they share theirs. I have a coworker in particular that I work with a lot who's great at teaching, comes from an education background, great at like scaffolding up concepts for learners, great at being on camera, but he's been honest with me that he hates the part of project management where you have to chase people down. I, coming from a community management, event management background, I'm a cat herder. Chasing people down is 90% of what I do, and I don't mind it. But I'm not an engineer, nor do I have a desire to be. So I'll let you look at the summary slide while I share a real world example. Is that about 2 months ago, my coworker and I, this particular one, got a last minute project dumped in our laps. We were pulled in after everybody else had already started on it. It was very high profile and it was going to be great for our team, but we were able to be honest with each other that it was a little frazzling and the timelines were stressful because we had that trust built up from our previous interactions. We were able to have that private team channel to commiserate about it with others while still being productive. And because we'd had this constant open conversation about what we were both good at and what we liked doing, I felt comfortable taking over all of the project management, just stepping in, doing with all the scheduling, the people chasing, and I was able to do this without feeling like I was stepping on his toes. And I was also able to trust that he was going to totally kill the content and video, handle all of that entirely without any input from me. And of course, he did, because we both knew what we were good at. And the important thing for me here isn't that we got it done, it's that we got it done in a way that we felt good about. Because my goal for myself and my teammates is that we're all able to find the best ways to let each other shine. In the middle of everything that we're going through right now, a bare minimum I think I can ask for is helping each other be happy and fulfilled at work. And I know that we couldn't have knocked this out of the park the way that we did without our trust built on these foundations of connection, communication, and empathy. And there we go.